In a courtroom meant to uphold justice, Judge Raymond Coulter did the opposite. He insulted Alana Brooks, a black nurse, calling her unfit to speak before even hearing her side. She stood there humiliated, accused of assault she didn't commit just for defending herself in a grocery store. But what no one in that courtroom knew was that the FBI had been watching, and they were about to walk in with a warrant. What could possibly turn a routine hearing into a federal takedown? If that grabbed you, leave a comment and let's step into the story together. Alana Brooks had faced chaos before: bleeding patients, cardiac arrests, families collapsing in hospital hallways, but nothing in 27 years of nursing prepared her for a white envelope delivered to her mailbox on a quiet Thursday morning. She stood at the sink, coffee untouched, hands trembling as she read the words out loud like they didn't belong to her life. Notice to appear. Criminal charges assault in a public place. She blinked. Assault. Her mind jumped back to the Sam's grocery parking lot 3 weeks earlier. A white man, mid-50s, red face, no mask, had stepped into her face as she was exiting the store. She'd simply said, "Sir, you're in the wrong direction. Please step back." That was it. He cursed at her, called her a black dictator. Then, like a scene out of a bad play, he threw himself backward onto the pavement, groaned loud enough to draw eyes, and screamed, "She hit me!" She hadn't touched him, not even a finger. And now here it was, a court date, a charge, a headline waiting to happen. Her daughter Maya came into the kitchen, hair still wet from her shift at the hospital. "Mama," she asked gently, "you okay?" Alana didn't speak. She just handed her the paper. Maya's eyes widened as she read it. Assault. Are you kidding me? Alana sat down slowly. Apparently not. This is insane. You didn't even touch that man. That man, Alana said, her voice low, is the son of State Senator Sloan. Maya's mouth dropped open. So, this is political. No, this is America. They drove to the courthouse the next morning in silence, Maya gripping the wheel harder than necessary. Alana staring out the window, rehearsing in her head how to say "I didn't do it" in a dozen different ways. The courthouse was old brick and cold glass, impersonal, institutional. As they passed through the security checkpoint, a white bailiff glanced at the clipboard, then looked at Alana and muttered just loud enough for them to hear, "Here comes the angry black nurse." Maya stopped in her tracks. "Excuse me?" she snapped. Alana touched her arm. "Let it go." "No, I won't." Let it go, Alana said, firmer this time. They walked on. But the silence between them now wasn't peace. It was pressure. On the second floor, Maya checked the docket list. She went pale. "Judge Coulter," she whispered. "Mom." "Judge Raymond Coulter." Alana closed her eyes. Everyone knew the name. He was a dinosaur from another time, sharp-tongued, politically protected, and never subtle about who he thought deserved the law's protection. Civil rights groups had filed complaints. None had stuck. Alana said nothing. She walked into the courtroom and sat in the defendant's seat. Her uniform was gone. No badge, no authority. Just a dark blazer, a folder of truth in her lap, and a system stacked against her. From behind the bench, the court clerk said, "All rise." Footsteps, then silence. The door opened. Judge Raymond Coulter entered, black robe, swaying eyes already scanning the room like a hawk spotting prey. And when his gaze landed on Alana, it lingered. His lips curved almost imperceptibly. He sat. "Docket number 22341, State of Georgia versus Alana Brooks," the clerk read. Judge Coulter didn't wait for a greeting. He leaned forward. "Well," he said slowly, voice rich with contempt, "this should be interesting." Alana looked at him, jaw clenched. Maya whispered. He already made up his mind. Alana didn't answer, but she knew. That look in his eyes wasn't curiosity. It was a verdict, and the trial hadn't even begun. The room settled into a strange stillness as Judge Raymond Coulter adjusted his robe and tapped a pen once, twice against the bench. He didn't look at Alana again, not yet. His eyes drifted to the prosecution table where Gavin Sloan sat, suit-pressed hair neatly parted, looking more like a senator in training than a man who'd faked an injury in a grocery store parking lot. Mr. Sloan Coulter said with a tone that sounded dangerously close to familiarity, "We'll begin with your account. Dean Raleigh." Alana's court-appointed attorney barely had time to raise an objection before Coulter cut him off with a look that might as well have been a muzzle. "We'll get to your side soon enough, counselor," the judge snapped. "Let the man speak." Gavin stood. He didn't even look at Alana as he began. "Your Honor, I was exiting Sam's grocery when the defendant charged at me without warning. She shoved my shoulder hard enough that I lost balance and hit the ground. I suffered bruising and a mild concussion. She never apologized. In fact, she yelled at me. Dean stood again. "Objection, Your Honor. That account is false. Sustained." Coulter said quickly, then turned to Dean with narrowed eyes. "And if you interrupt again before it's your turn, I'll have you removed." Maya's head snapped toward the bench. Her hands gripped the edge of the gallery bench so tightly her knuckles whitened. Alana glanced at her and gave a faint shake of the head. "Not here. Not yet." Gavin continued, feigning humility. "I understand tensions are high these days, Your Honor. But I believe in respect. I believe people should treat each other like human beings. I did nothing to provoke this woman." "This woman," Coulter gave a slow nod, then turned finally to Alana. "Ms. Brooks?" he said, voice like glass underfoot. "Would you care to respond?" Alana began to rise. "Yes, Your Honor. I was exiting the store when, let me guess, he cut in. You felt threatened. You felt like you were just doing your job. You were trying to enforce store policy. You felt cornered." Alana froze mid-sentence. Coulter raised an eyebrow. "I've heard the script before, Ms. Brooks." Dean stood. "Your Honor, with all due respect." Coulter pounded his gavel. Once, not loud but final. "Sit down, counselor. I won't have this courtroom turned into a circus." Alana sat again, the blood draining from her fingers. Then came the line that hung in the air like poison. "You're used to chaos." "Ms. Brooks," Coulter said, voice cold and deliberate. "That's what nurses bring, isn't it? Order breaks down, emotions run high, and someone always gets hurt." The gallery rustled. Someone coughed. Someone else whispered. Ezra, the young court officer standing near the side wall, shifted his weight. His jaw tensed. He looked at the judge, then at Alana, then back at the judge. He didn't say a word. But something in his expression changed. Like watching a line get crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. Dean leaned toward Alana, whispered, "Stay calm. Just breathe. We'll get our chance." Alana didn't answer. She just stared ahead, still and composed on the outside, but something had fractured quietly beneath her ribs. Maya, sitting in the gallery, looked as if she might stand up and scream. But she didn't. She dug her fingernails into her palm instead. She didn't look away from the judge, not even for a second. Gavin sat down slowly, like a man settling into comfort he hadn't earned, and Judge Coulter. He opened his file, scribbled something, and didn't say another word for the next 5 minutes. The silence wasn't rest. It was power. In that courtroom, Alana wasn't a nurse, a mother, a woman who'd spent her life holding hands while people died. She was just a defendant, and that word in that space carried a weight no resume could lighten. Coulter finally looked up, eyes scanning the room again. Not searching, asserting. "We'll recess for 10 minutes, he said flatly and stood. As he turned, his gaze landed on Alana one last time. She met his eyes. He blinked first, only barely. And then he walked out. Maya reached for her mother's hand. Alana didn't pull away. But she didn't squeeze back either. The hallway outside the courtroom was too bright. The kind of harsh, sterile light that didn't warm anything, just exposed it. Alana sat on a wooden bench, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She kept her shoulders still, her breathing even, but her mind wasn't quiet. It had drifted far from that building, far from the courtroom, back to a hospital room during a time no one wants to remember. His name was Walter Keene. He was a retired firefighter, mid-50s white, and clinging to life in an ICU bed during the second wave of COVID. His daughter had called to ask about him. When Alana offered to let her speak to him by phone, the daughter hesitated. "She's not his nurse, right?" the woman had asked. "She's the charge nurse tonight," another voice had replied. There was a pause, then a clipped response. "We'd rather wait for someone else." But there wasn't anyone else, only Alana, so she stayed. She adjusted his oxygen, held his hand through 2 hours of rapid decline, and whispered prayers under her mask. Prayers she didn't know if he believed in. When his heart finally gave out, she was still there. She didn't post about it. She didn't cry. She simply walked out at sunrise, drove home, and came back for her next shift. And now here she was, being tried for an assault she didn't commit by a judge who wouldn't let her finish a sentence. She didn't feel angry, not yet, just hollow. The sound of heels broke her thoughts. She looked up. Yolanda Freeman. her former supervisor. Tall, dignified, steady. The kind of woman whose presence didn't need a microphone. She wore a dark green blazer and walked straight toward Alana with a look that said, "I'm here because you matter." "I came as soon as I heard," Yolanda said, settling beside her. "I didn't think anyone would," Alana replied. Yolanda didn't smile. She just looked at her and said, "He's denied testimony before. But I brought a statement. I saw the video. I know what really happened. If they won't let me speak, I'll be sitting right behind you, every minute." In court, Dean stood and requested to call Yolanda as a character witness. "Denied," Judge Coulter said without looking up, "Your Honor." Ms. Freeman is a decorated medical supervisor with— I said no, that's final. Yolanda sat in the back row. Her face didn't move, but her hand gripped her statement so tightly the pages curled at the corners. During a break, Maya found her mother by the vending machines, her shoulders stiff, eyes blank. "There's a deal," Maya said quietly. "Dean thinks if you plead no contest, you'll avoid jail. It might just be community service. No record if you finish the program." Alana didn't answer at first. She watched a vending coil slowly spin and drop a packet of almonds for someone else. Maya took a step closer. "It's not fair, but maybe it's safer. Maybe this goes away faster." Alana turned to her. "Goes away." Her voice was low, measured. "You think I can walk out of here and forget this?" "Mama, I just want you to be okay." "I know," she said. "You want to protect me. But this—" She paused, breathing through the weight in her chest. "This isn't about a clean record. This is about who I am and what they're trying to take from me." Maya swallowed hard. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "What if fighting back makes it worse?" Alana looked straight at her eyes, calm but unblinking. "What if doing the right thing costs me everything?" The words fell between them like a stone dropped in still water. No anger, no drama, just truth plain and heavy. Later that night, Alana sat on the edge of her bed staring at a framed certificate on the wall. It read, "In recognition of courage and leadership during the COVID-19 pandemic." The glass caught a flicker of lamplight and made the seal shimmer like it mattered. She reached out and took it off the wall. Not in anger, just quietly. Downstairs, Maya sat at the dining table, scrolling through the original video again. The footage was shaky, recorded by a bystander's phone. Alana never touched the man. He threw himself down, played the victim, lied without blinking. Maya didn't hesitate this time. She opened a message window and attached the clip. She typed one sentence. "She doesn't believe in herself. Maybe you still do." She hit send and watched the screen display a name: Darius Langston, FBI Special Agent, and Alana Brooks's nephew. The courtroom had quieted, but it wasn't calm. It was that kind of silence that pressed down on everyone's shoulders. Heavy, tense, like thunder was circling above the ceiling tiles and hadn't found its strike yet. Dean Raleigh rose from his seat with an envelope in hand and a tight jaw. "Your Honor," he said carefully, "we move to submit 2 pieces of evidence for the defense. First, medical reports confirming Mr. Sloan sustained no injuries matching the claims of assault. And second, a video recorded by a bystander clearly showing the defendant never laid a hand on him." Judge Coulter didn't even look up. He flipped a page on his docket, then said flatly, "Overruled. Independent videos without a verified chain of custody are inadmissible, and medical reports can be interpreted however the reader wants." Dean frowned. "Sir, with all due respect, these documents are verified." "They were," I said. "Overruled," Coulter cut in, voice cold and hard. "You can take that up with appeals." Alana sat still beside Dean, her back straight but her hands twitching in her lap. Her fingers curled, uncurled. She was breathing, but just enough to keep from shaking. Dean turned to her, gave a tiny nod. It was now or never. Alana stood. Her voice was soft at first. "May I speak, Your Honor?" Coulter gave her the kind of look a man gives a child who doesn't know when to be quiet. "You've already said more than enough, Ms. Brooks." But Alana didn't sit. She looked right at him. Not with defiance, with clarity. "No, sir, I haven't." That froze the room. Alana stepped forward, holding the manila envelope Dean had handed her. "I'm a nurse. For 27 years. I've watched people die with no one but me in the room. I've worked 12-hour shifts with 4 hours sleep during wildfires, during riots, and during the pandemic when your hospitals begged us not to quit." She paused. Her hands didn't shake anymore. The man accusing me, Gavin Sloan, refused to wear a mask inside a crowded store. When I asked him to keep his distance, he yelled. He mocked me. And then he collapsed to the floor like he was auditioning for a role in his daddy's next campaign ad. The gallery stirred. Coulter leaned forward now, voice slick with sarcasm. Ms. Brooks, I suggest you tread carefully. We're not interested in your opinions. This isn't an opinion, she said louder. This is what happened. Coulter snapped. You know what I think? I think maybe if you weren't so used to losing patience, you'd know how to treat the living. And just like that, the room dropped 10 degrees. Gasps echoed. Someone in the gallery whispered, Did he just? A woman in the second row began to cry quietly, her tissue trembling in her hand. Maya, sitting just behind her mother, shot upright in her seat, tears welling. What did you just say to her? She whispered, too stunned to yell. Even Dean froze. Alana didn't. She didn't move right away, but when she did, she stepped forward so slowly it felt like the room had to lean in to hear what would come next. Her voice didn't tremble. I've lost patience. Judge Coulter. Hundreds. Some I knew by name. Some I held as they took their last breath. I lost sleep. I lost parts of myself I haven't gotten back. Her eyes never left his, but I never lost my dignity. Not until this courtroom tried to rip it from me. There was no yelling, no dramatic music, just the sound of a truth so raw it silenced even the judge. Coulter leaned back, jaw tight, but said nothing. Behind him, Ezra, the court clerk, shifted in his chair. He leaned toward Dean and murmured under his breath, just loud enough, He's done this too many times, and Dean looked at him, not surprised, just tired. Coulter tapped his gavel once, let's move on. But the gavel didn't reset the room, because something had changed. Something had cracked. Alana didn't sit right away. She looked around the room at the eyes staring back at her, some ashamed, some wide with realization, others blinking through tears. Then she returned to her seat slowly. Beside her, Maya placed her hand over Alana's no words. Just a grip that said, I see you. And for the first time since the trial began, people weren't looking at the judge. They were looking at her. It started not with a shout, not even a whisper, just a quiet click. Ezra sat behind his desk in the corner of the courtroom, his expression unchanged, his hands moving almost absently. But what he was doing wasn't routine. It was deliberate. He had pulled up a list long, clinical, buried deep in the court database and forwarded it in a silent email to Dean Raleigh, the public defender who had looked like he'd nearly lost hope an hour ago. The subject line read, Cases, look deeper. Dean was still shaken by what had unfolded. Alana's words hadn't just pierced the room, they had cut through something in him too. He'd been in courtrooms for 16 years, but this one felt infected, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the patterns of injustice. He checked his phone as he stepped out briefly into the hall and read the attachment Ezra had sent. 92 prior cases under Judge Raymond Coulter. 84 defendants were Black or Latino. 77 had received sentences higher than the recommended guidelines. 16 had lost appeals due to courtroom conduct. Dean blinked at the numbers, then read them again. This wasn't just about one nurse. This was something else. Back inside the courtroom, Maya sat quietly, hands clasped on her knees, her head tilted slightly as she watched her mother breathe. Alana had gone still again, silent, collected, but Maya knew her calm wasn't peace. It was restraint. The same restraint she'd practiced her entire life. Dean returned to the defense table, his phone still open to the data Ezra had sent. He looked at Maya, lowering his voice. Where did the video come from? The real one. You didn't shoot it, did you? Maya shook her head. No, I sent it to someone. Someone I trust. Dean raised a brow. Friend, she hesitated. More than that. Darius. He's my cousin. He's also with the Bureau. Dean leaned back just slightly. The FBI, she nodded. Dean exhaled slowly, a new weight settling in his chest. Not dread, not relief. Something more complicated. Like he'd been handed a map of a battlefield he didn't know he was standing on. He stared down at this bench in front of him and muttered, Then this whole thing's bigger than I thought. 2 rows behind them, the bailiff, Officer Jensen, leaned toward Ezra as he passed the bench. His voice was nearly a breath, but Ezra caught it. Word is the feds might already be watching, he said. Something big's coming. Ezra didn't respond. He didn't need to. because now for the first time since the trial began, the silence in the room didn't feel helpless. It felt loaded. Like the people inside it had stopped being afraid. Not loudly, not obviously, just enough. Dean looked at Alana again. She hadn't said a word since the insult. But her silence wasn't surrender. It was the silence of someone waiting for the truth to catch up. And maybe, just maybe, it was getting closer. The courtroom had gone unusually still. Judge Coulter leaned back in his chair, clearly irritated. He adjusted his robe as if it were too tight, though it wasn't. His voice cut through the silence with surgical coldness. "We've heard enough grandstanding. Ms. Brooks, if you insist on addressing the court, make it brief. This isn't a therapy session." Dean Raleigh shifted, his jaw clenched. He looked to Alana, but she was already rising, calm and upright, as if the tension in the air had simply passed through her. "I won't take long," Alana said, her voice even. "But I will speak." Coulter scoffed and didn't bother hiding it. "Then speak and be done." Alana stepped forward, not to dramatize, but to reclaim her space. She looked neither apologetic nor combative. She simply looked grounded. "I want to tell you about a man named Thomas Wren. He was my patient 3 years ago. Lung cancer, late stage. He was white, stubborn, and proud." Her eyes moved across the courtroom. "He didn't have visitors, no family listed. I once asked if he had kids. He laughed and said, 'Not anymore.' A soft cough from this gallery was the only sound. He told me, 'People forget you exist if you get sick long enough.' I told him, 'Then you and I have something in common.'" Alana paused, letting the words linger. "Thomas had days where he didn't speak. On those days I'd just sit by his bed, adjust the light, hold his hand when the tremors came." Her voice grew quieter, steadier. "On his last morning he reached for me. Just once. Didn't say a word. Just held on. He passed away 2 hours later." Alana's hand hovered at her side as she whispered, "He didn't have a daughter, so I became one." A wave of silence swept the courtroom, but this time it wasn't empty. It was full of breath held, of hearts shifted. Maya bit her lip, trembling, then suddenly stood and walked out of her row to sit beside her mother, slipping her hand into Alana's. The two didn't look at each other, but something between them had reconnected, quiet, fierce, and permanent. Coulter adjusted his glasses. "Well," he said, flatly, "as touching as that little monologue was, it changes nothing. You are still the defendant here, Ms. Brooks. You may be dismissed." Dean opened his mouth in disbelief. "Your Honor." But then it happened. The courtroom doors swung open, not a creak, but a commanding crash. 3 men in dark suits entered, crisp, focused, scanning the room. Their footsteps echoed like hammers across marble. Coulter's voice rose, instantly defensive and loud. "What is the meaning of this?" The tallest of the men stepped forward, pulling out a leather badge holder. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Special Agent Darius Freeman, FBI. We're here on a federal order." Maya stood up sharply. "Darius," she breathed. "You came." Dean turned to her, stunned. "That's your cousin." Darius moved forward toward the bench, every step deliberate. From his coat pocket, he produced a folded document and laid it down before Coulter. "You, Judge Raymond Coulter, are under investigation for abuse of judicial authority, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations. Effective immediately, you are relieved of duty pending inquiry." Coulter stood so abruptly his chair scraped hard against the floor. You can't barge into my courtroom." "This isn't your courtroom anymore," Darius said, steady as stone. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Coulter looked around as if expecting anyone to defend him. No one moved. Ezra, still at the clerk's desk, stood up for the first time since the trial began and said loud enough for the whole room to hear, "It's been your courtroom for too long." Coulter's face contorted not with fear, but rage born of losing control. "This is a circus." But no one was laughing. Maya walked to her mother, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Alana hadn't moved. She was watching Darius, watching the moment her silence turned into something louder than any shout. The courtroom had shifted. Power had shifted. And as 2 FBI agents walked behind the bench toward Coulter, Agent Freeman looked once toward Alana and said quietly, "You didn't lose your dignity, ma'am. You held the line." Coulter was escorted from the bench, but it wasn't the fall of a judge that people remembered later. It was the way Alana stood still, firm and finally seen. For a second, it was like the whole courtroom forgot how to breathe. Judge Coulter's gavel had just slammed down with the kind of finality that dared anyone to question him. Alana stood still. Maya gripped the bench with white knuckles, and Dean was mid-sentence, Lips parted when the doors burst open with a force that made everyone jump. The sound of polished shoes striking marble echoed in, followed by dark suits, stern eyes, and one unmistakable voice. Federal Bureau of Investigation Darius Freeman announced as he strode into the room, badge held high. This courtroom is now under federal authority. What in God's name? Coulter started, his robe bristling as he stood. Darius didn't flinch. Judge Raymond Coulter, he said, voice flat and sure. You are under arrest for obstruction of justice, abuse of power, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. A beat, 2. Then chaos. You can't be serious. Coulter barked, his voice rising an octave as panic crept into his posture. I'm presiding over an active case. You will not disrupt my court. This is no longer your court, Darius said coldly. Murmurs swept the gallery. Ezra stood halfway, then sat again, heart pounding. Gavin Sloane sat rigid, pale eyes darting like a cornered animal. Coulter pointed at the agents flanking Darius. This is a political stunt. You don't arrest a sitting judge in the middle of a session. Darius took a slow step forward. And you don't humiliate a black nurse on record, silence evidence, and manipulate verdicts to favor the sons of senators. Dean froze, his mouth opened slightly. Ezra leaned forward. Coulter scoffed, reaching for his gavel, but Ezra was faster. The courtroom clerk stood, lifted the polished nameplate from the bench, and walked it across the aisle. Wordlessly, he placed it in Darius's hand. It's about time, Ezra said under his breath. Coulter stared at him, betrayed. You after all these years. Ezra's eyes didn't blink. After all your victims. The gavel slipped from Coulter's hand and landed on the floor with a thud no one bothered to pick up. 2 agents moved in. One stepped behind the bench, the other to Coulter's side. You touch me, Coulter growled, and I will have every single one of you in contempt. The agent responded by reading him his rights. Alana didn't move. Her face was unreadable, but her hands folded tightly in front of her slowly began to relax. Maya covered her mouth, whispering, "Oh my God, it's really happening." Dean looked down. His voice was quiet but heavy. I sat here and let it happen, he muttered. Then glancing toward Alana, I didn't fight hard enough. You're fighting now, she replied. That's what matters. As the cuffs clicked around Coulter's wrists, the judge turned one last time to the room, scanning it for someone, anyone who might still defend him. Gavin didn't move. The courtroom officers didn't move. Even the bailiff, who had always stood behind him, simply looked away. And then Maya said it, barely audible but full of the fire she got from her mother. You picked the wrong woman to humiliate. Alana didn't gloat. She didn't smile. But for the first time since this nightmare began, she exhaled, as Coulter was led away, no longer. Judge Just Raymond, the courtroom remained utterly silent. No more sneers, no more interruptions. Just the deep, humbling hush of a place finally returning to what it should have been all along. A place where dignity mattered. A place where truth wasn't silenced. And for the first time, Alana stood in that room not as the accused, but as the one who endured. The courtroom had never felt so still. With Judge Coulter led away in handcuffs, a strange quiet settled over the room, not the silence of fear, but the kind that follows a storm when people are left looking at the damage and wondering what comes next. Alana didn't move at first. She stood beside the table where she had defended herself with nothing but truth and dignity, her hands still clasped as if holding together all the broken pieces of her composure. Across the room, Maya took a hesitant step forward, but it was Darius who reached her first. Can I speak with her for a moment? He asked the court officer softly. The officer nodded. Take your time. You've earned it. Darius approached gently. Not like an agent, not even like a witness, but like family. Alana looked up, and for a brief second she was no longer the woman who had stood against power or prejudice. She was just a mother who hadn't seen the boy she once raised in years. I thought I failed you, she whispered, voice tight. I thought I should have done more. Darius shook his head, his eyes warm but unreadable. No, he said almost too quietly. You made me. Those 3 words broke whatever wall Alana had been holding up inside. Her shoulders sank, not in defeat, but in release. She didn't cry. But for the first time that day, her breath came freely. Maya crossed the room and threw her arms around her mother, burying her face into Alana's shoulder. There was no holding back the tears then, and this time they weren't from fear or frustration. They were relief. the kind that softens something hardened by years of holding it all in. "You raised him right, Mom," Maya said, voice muffled by her own sob. "And me too." Alana held them both, daughter on one side, and across from her the boy she once fed from her savings and taught how to stand up tall even when the world tried to shrink him. And now, here he was, wearing the badge that once seemed so distant, wielding a kind of power that wasn't loud or vengeful, but deliberate, responsible. A few feet away, Dean Raleigh, the public defender, stood with his head lowered. His earlier certainty had long faded. What remained was humility. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "I should have pushed harder. I should have seen it." "You were doing your job," Alana replied gently. "But now maybe you're ready to do something more." Dean looked down at the stack of case files Ezra had slipped him just hours ago. Names, dates, and outcomes that all shared one pattern. He held them close as if suddenly aware of how heavy the truth could be when you're finally willing to carry it. "I'm requesting to withdraw as defense counsel," he said aloud, speaking not just to Alana but to the room. "Effective immediately. I'll also be petitioning for a formal investigation into 28 prior convictions overseen by Judge Coulter." Gasps echoed softly. Somewhere in the back, even the court clerk stopped typing. "This isn't about making a statement," Dean added. "It's about writing a pattern. And it starts today." Darius gave a small nod. He knew it wouldn't undo all the damage, but it would stop the bleeding. And for now, that was something. As the courtroom began to empty, Ezra approached, no longer trying to stay invisible. He glanced at Alana, then at Maya, then back at Darius. "Thank you," he said, "for reminding us why we signed up in the first place." Darius nodded. "We don't fix everything in a day, but we stop pretending we can't." Outside, reporters waited, unaware of what had just unfolded inside the courtroom. But for the people still standing there, Alana, Maya, Darius, Dean, Ezra, Justice wasn't just an event. It was a feeling quiet and weighty, like the air just before a new day begins. And for the first time in a long time, Alana Brooks walked out not as a defendant, not as a woman trying to prove herself, but as a reminder that truth doesn't need permission to rise. It only needs someone brave enough to carry it. The courthouse may have gone quiet, but the world outside had just begun to stir. Within 24 hours, the video Maya posted of her mother standing tall, while a judge tried to humiliate her, of Coulter being arrested mid-session, and of truth cutting through a room built to suppress it, was everywhere. Over 3 million views, thousands of shares. Not just from activists or journalists, but from nurses, teachers, veterans, students, people who had no reason to care suddenly finding every reason to speak. Maya didn't write a caption. She didn't need to. The images spoke for themselves. Her inbox was flooded with messages. "Thank you for posting this. Your mother is a hero. I didn't even know this could happen in 2025, and I'm glad I know now." But the ones that struck deepest were addressed not to Maya but to Alana. Letters began arriving at her small apartment, most handwritten, some typed, many with trembling signatures. Former patients. Families of the ones she had held in their final hours. People who had once judged her too quickly, or who had never thanked her when it mattered. One note simply read, "You didn't just save my father's life. You reminded him he was worth saving." Another said, "I remember your eyes through the mask. They never blinked when I was scared. Now I see what they were holding back." Alana read every single one. She didn't reply to most. She didn't need to. The act of being seen, finally wholly, was more than enough. For years, her job had been about staying invisible, efficient, resilient. Now the world had pressed pause, just long enough to say, "We saw you. We were wrong to wait this long." Meanwhile, Dean Raleigh was trying to rebuild something in himself he didn't quite know was broken until now. He had always prided himself on playing by the book. But in this case, the book had been written by people like Coulter and weaponized against people like Alana. He submitted an article to The Atlantic, unsure if they'd even read it. They did. And they published it under the title he had stayed up all night rewriting, "How I Let Law Silence Justice and Why I Won't Again." In it, he detailed not just Alana's case, but his own quiet complicity. How easy it had been to treat each case as a checklist, how hard it was to see injustice when it was dressed in legal robes. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He asked for better laws, better training, better courage. The article went viral not as fast as the video, but deep. Law schools added it to ethics discussions. Bar associations sent it around with disclaimers and discussion guides. And most importantly, young attorneys began to ask questions their mentors weren't used to hearing. At the same time, Ezra, the court clerk, who had watched it all unfold from behind a desk for too many years, received a formal invitation from the Department of Justice. They didn't want him to be just a witness. They wanted him on the reform task force, not for show, for insight. "I'm not a politician," he told them. "That's exactly why we need you," they said. So he accepted. And what about Alana? She didn't go on television. She turned down every talk show and every morning news segment. She didn't sit for podcasts or documentaries, not because she had nothing to say, but because the courtroom had already said it all. When the dean of a local nursing school called her personally and offered her a visiting lecturer position, she didn't hesitate. She'd spent her life saving lives. Now she would teach others how to hold life with dignity and never let anyone diminish their worth. Her first class began in September. She didn't bring up the trial. She didn't wear the medal they tried to take from her. She just walked in, placed her notes on the podium, and began with one sentence. "You will see people on the worst days of their lives. Your job is not to fix that day. Your job is to remind them they still matter in it." And somehow every student sat up straighter. Maya visited her mother's class every week after that. She didn't sit in the front. She didn't take notes. She just listened, sometimes with pride, sometimes with tears, always with the quiet knowledge that everything had changed, and not just for them. Outside that small classroom, the world kept turning. But something had shifted. Not in headlines or policies, but in memory. In how people remembered who stood when it wasn't safe. In how silence could be defiant. And in how justice, once found, doesn't speak loudly, but clearly, like a bell rung across a quiet field. The auditorium was quiet, but not because the room was empty. It was filled to the last row, students in white coats, faculty in dark robes, and families pressing tissues to their eyes. They weren't clapping yet. They were listening. Maya Brooks stood at the podium, her voice steady, but her hands lightly trembling as she gripped the edge. "I never thought I'd make it here," she began. "But I never imagined I'd come carrying so many people with me." She looked out over the sea of faces, then down at the white coat she wore, new pressed gleaming beneath the lights. "This coat," she said, pausing, "will see pain. It will see fear. It will see people on their knees. But I will wear it standing tall, in the name of the woman who wore scrubs with pride, who was told to kneel and never did." The room stayed silent for a moment before a wave of applause broke like a tide. Not polite, not formal, just full, as if everyone there understood that this wasn't a graduation. It was a passing of something sacred. Somewhere in the back of the hall, Alana sat quietly, unnoticed by most. Her hair pulled back, her eyes stiller now than they'd ever been. She wasn't there for the applause. She was there because her daughter had found her voice and used it not to echo pain, but to carry something forward. That same week, Darius Brooks filed paperwork for a new federal initiative, the Brooks Initiative, a cross-agency task force to track and expose racial bias in the justice system. It wasn't just policy, it was personal. Every clause in the mission statement had roots in someone Darius had watched suffer. And at the top of the first internal memo in black bold letters were the words, "This exists because someone finally said enough." He sent a single copy to Alana, nothing written inside, just his signature and the seal. She kept it in a drawer next to her nursing pins, and the first apology letter she ever received from a patient's son. Elsewhere in a city hospital not far from where it all began, a new plaque was installed in the front lobby. No one made an announcement. No ribbon was cut. But over time, more and more people paused in front of it. It read, "In honor of those who stayed," dedicated to the nurses who showed up when the world shut down. Beneath it was a single engraved name, Alana Brooks. Late one afternoon, Alana returned to that hospital not to visit, not to work, just to sit. She found a bench just beyond the sliding doors, where the light filtered through the glass in soft golden streaks. No one noticed her. But a few nurses passed by and looked twice. One of them smiled. Another whispered something to her colleague. Still, Alana didn't move. She just sat there quietly, her hands resting on her lap, watching the sky turn. She didn't need to speak. The world had already heard her, and as the sun dipped below the city skyline, her face lifted gently toward it. A breeze passed by, carrying with it the quiet kind of peace that doesn't come from winning, but from having never given up. In that moment, nothing needed to be explained. Not the years, not the trial, not the pain, not even the justice. Because what remained was something deeper than verdicts or applause. What remained was dignity, and as the story closes, a voice returns, not loud, not dramatic, just steady. Justice came late, but dignity never left. Sometimes dignity isn't about raising your voice. It's about refusing to be broken, even when the system tries to silence you. Alana Brooks didn't fight for fame or revenge. She stood her ground so that no nurse, no woman, no Black American would have to bow to injustice again. This story reminds us that the quietest courage often leaves the deepest legacy. If this story moved you, please like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Mr. Mac's Stories for more powerful, true-to-life tales like this one. Your support means the world to us. It gives our team the heart to keep creating stories that matter. Because here at Mr. Mac's Stories, we don't just tell stories. We remember the ones no one else dares to speak.